Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today we will be talking about chapters 15 and 16 of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. It's important to remember at this point in the text, the monster is giving his narration to Victor up in the mountains in this cave. He's telling Victor what has been happening to him since, since his moment of creation, where he has been during this entire time. And as the monster gets into his narration, he talks about the circumstances that allows him to observe DeLacy and his family. He's hiding in the hovel, looking in the back of their house, observing them. And during this time, while old man DeLacy is teaching Safie how to read, write, and speak, the monster makes use of that very same instruction. And the monster starts to study and learn. The monster learns to speak French, learns to read and write. And this benefits the monster in chapter 15 here, as when he was out for a walk one day, he comes across this book bag, this backpack with some books in it. And for the monster, these books are obviously a prize, something that he can, something that he can read now and learn more about history. These books include John Milton's Paradise Lost, Plutarch's Lives, and The Sorrows of Werter. We're going to focus on Paradise Lost for our discussion here. And so the monster, as the monster reads through these books, he reads them. These are stories about humans. He reads them looking for himself. He's like, I've read lots of books about humans. Where are the monsters? Where are my descendants? Where do I fit in? As he describes here, my person was hideous and my stature gigantic. What did this mean? Who was I? What was I? Whence did I come and what was my destination? These questions continually recurred, but I was unable to solve them. The monster is reading these books in the hopes that one of these books will have a chapter on who he is. Where are the other monsters? Where are those who are like me? And yet none of these books provide them for him. Now, he does read John Milton's Paradise Lost. And if I'm going to talk about if we're going to talk about the impact that Paradise Lost has on the monster, we have to understand the book itself. So John Milton's Paradise Lost is an epic poem that is a retelling of the Adam and Eve myth. So in the book of Genesis, there's the story of Adam and Eve, who are the first humans, who are put in the Garden of Eden, who eat of the forbidden fruit and get themselves cast out of the Garden of Eden. In the Genesis version, it's something like 10 verses. What John Milton does with Paradise Lost is expand the story out into a full-fledged story that describes the events of Adam and Eve. And if you understand Paradise Lost, you have to understand that it doesn't start with Adam and Eve. It starts with the character of Satan. Now, according to Paradise Lost, Satan was a character. Satan was an angel in heaven. Satan was an angel in heaven. He, and the angels in heaven at this time, the angels lived in heaven. They were immortal. They didn't have to worry about death. They didn't have to worry about pain and suffering. They were given everything. They lived in paradise. But they were not given free will and they were not given knowledge. They were servants to God. They did whatever God said. They didn't question. They didn't make their own choices. They were not given free will. And even though they're living in paradise, this did not sit well with Satan. Satan wanted more. Satan wanted knowledge of the universe. Satan wanted the ability to determine his own future. He didn't want to be a slave to heaven. And of course, when God says no to this, Satan gathers a group of angels known as the rebel angels, and he wages civil war in heaven. These rebel angels, it leads to a violent and bloody civil war, angel fighting angel, which is oft depicted in art, as you can see here with these pages I'm showing, wages this violent civil war in heaven, trying to earn the right to have knowledge. And of course, Satan loses. It's not surprising that Satan loses. As is described in Paradise Lost, God seized upon Satan and cast him flaming ethereal from the heavens into the burning pit of perdition, of hell, and what they describe as perdition. And as Satan is cast down into perdition, he now is stuck down in hell, which is described in Paradise Lost as being a circular dungeon filled with fire that gives off no light. Imagine living in hell, living with these demons, being burned eternally and yet not even be able to see because the fire gives off no light. And as Satan arrives in hell, he looks around and he embraces it. He leads to some of the most famous quotes in literary history in Paradise Lost, where he looks around and he says, I will make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. He's like, and then it's followed up with one of the great examples of antithesis. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. He's like, you know what? It is better for me to be the ruler of hell than to be a servant in heaven, even though he's being tortured for all eternity. And his rebel angels become his demons, and he starts to rule over hell. And so Satan is cast into hell. Shortly after he is cast into hell, God creates man. God creates Adam and Eve. God creates man, and he creates the Garden of Eden. And in the Garden of Eden, the Garden of Eden is paradise. There's no death. There's no pain. There's no forums due on the weekends. It is paradise. Adam and Eve have nothing to worry about. He creates Adam first, then he needs to create a companion for Adam. As they describe, he takes a rib from Adam's side and creates Eve out of that rib. And Adam and Eve are given everything. And in the middle of the Garden of Eden, there's this one tree. It's known as the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And this one tree has, it's often depicted giving off the fruit of an apple, even though it's probably more likely given the region that the Garden of Eden was supposedly located in. It was probably a pomegranate, but regardless. It gives off this one fruit. And God comes down to Adam and Eve and says, look, there's one rule here. You can live in paradise, no pain, no suffering, no death, none of that. But you cannot eat of the fruit of this one tree. This one tree is off limits. Do not touch the fruit. Anything else in the garden you can have, but do not eat of the fruit of this one tree. And of course, you could ask the question, why would God put that tree in the garden in the first place? But so Adam and Eve start to live their lives there. And Satan sees this from hell. And no pun intended, he says, what the hell? Why is it that Adam and Eve have been given the very same thing that I desired? Adam and Eve are given free will. They're given the opportunity to make choice. He says, why is it that I was not allowed to have, why is it that Adam and Eve were given the very same things that I wanted? And I get cast into hell from it. It's really not fair, Satan feels. And so Satan decides to get vengeance on Adam and Eve. He doesn't think it's fair. And to do so, you have to understand the relationship between Adam and Eve. You see, in the text, God creates Adam first. Adam is the male. Adam is created in God's image. He is beautiful. And then he creates Eve. And it's described in the text. John Milton makes it very clear that God was created, quote, he for God, she for God in him. He for God. Adam was created in the image of God to speak to God. She for God in him being Adam. In other words, Adam worships God, Eve worships Adam. Milton, this puritanical writer, goes out of his way to make sure it's very clear that there's a hierarchy here. That there's God, and then below God is Adam, and then below Adam is Eve. That Eve is subject to Adam, that she is subservient to Adam. And it's this distinction that Satan makes use of. You see, Satan transforms himself into a serpent. Everyone knows this. Transforms himself into a serpent, sneaks into the Garden of Eden. And when he sneaks into the Garden of Eden, he approaches Eve. And he says to Eve, you should eat of the fruit of this tree. And Eve, of course, is like, but I was told not to. And Satan says, well, you do know that this is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. If you eat of the fruit of this tree, you will gain knowledge just like Adam, and you will be the same as Adam. You will be equal to Adam. And as Milton goes out of his way to portray Eve as being vain and kind of full of herself, Eve, of course, wants to be equal to Adam. And that's how Satan tricks her into taking the fruit and eating of the fruits. And whereas in the Genesis version, it is described as Satan tempted Eve. Eve ate of the apple and gave it to Adam, and he ate it as well, as if to suggest the Genesis version almost allows you to interpret it as Adam and Eve were present together at the same time, and both ate of the fruit at the same time and therefore were both culpable. Milton goes out of his way to paint a picture of Eve eats the apple, runs off to find Adam, who's off working somewhere, and gives the apple to Adam as if to suggest it wasn't Adam's fault at all, that Eve screwed things up. And this, of course, begins a long literary tradition of literature which depicts women leading to the ruin of men. Eve eats of the apple, gives it to Adam, gets them both kicked out of paradise. The Bible is full of these stories, right? Samson and Delilah, David and Bathsheba. Arthurian legend is full of these stories. Bersalac's wife and Sir Gawain the Green Knight, or Arthur and Morgana Le Fay. There's any number of these Arthurian legend stories where a woman leads to the downfall of men. Even Shakespeare, the tragedy of Macbeth. I mean, there's so many stories that kind of take their tradition from this. And so Adam and Eve do partake of the fruits. The moment they partake of the fruits, a very interesting scene in the story. The moment they take part, the moment they eat the fruit, the first thing that changes is that they notice that they're naked and they're ashamed by it. They look down like, oh my God, I'm naked. They jump in some bushes to hide their nakedness. And God comes walking through the garden. And God is like, wait a minute, why are you hiding from me? Why are you feeling shame? Oh, you must have eaten of the fruit. And because they do so, of course, they get cast out of the Garden of Eden. They now have to deal with death. They will die someday, pain and childbirth, pain and suffering, all of that. It is known as the original sin. They're cast out of the Garden of Eden, and now all of a sudden they've got pain. They got pain in childbirth. They got hunger and thirst and homework. Now they have to suffer. They're cast out of the Garden of Eden. And so the monster comes across this story, Paradise Lost, and he reads it. And for the monster, he doesn't understand the idea of fiction. As he says here, I read it as a true history. I thought that this was a true story. It moved every feeling of wonder and awe that a picture of an omnipotent God warring with its creatures was capable of exciting. I often refer to several situations as their similarity struck me to my own. He says, initially I thought I was Adam. Like Adam, I was apparently united by no link to any other being in existence. But his state was far different from mine in every other respect. He had come forth from the hands of God a perfect creature, happy and prosperous, guarded by the especial care of his Creator. He was allowed to converse with and acquire knowledge of beings of a superior nature, but I was wretched, helpless, and alone. Many times I considered Satan a more fitter emblem for my condition, for often, like him, when I viewed the bliss of my protectors, the bitter gall of envy rose within me. As the monster reads the story, he's like, no, I'm not Adam. Adam was loved by his creator. He was created in the image of his creator. God made Adam to look like him. The monster does not look like Victor. The monster is hideous. He's like, I'm not Adam in this story. I'm Satan. I'm the one who wanted more knowledge, who's been cast into hell, who's been abandoned by his creator, and must suffer for all eternity because of that. And so Paradise Lost has a profound impact on the sense of injustice that the monster feels at this point in the text. As he continues on here, we start to get some answers to some of the questions we have at this point in the text. Right after that, he describes another circumstance strengthened and confirmed these feelings. Soon after my arrival in the hovel, I discovered some papers in the pocket of the dress which I had taken from your laboratory. At first, I had neglected them, but now I could decipher the characters in which they were written, and I began to study them with diligence. So when the monster left Victor's apartment that night after his creation, before he left, the monster grabbed a coat that was left in Victor's apartment and covered himself in that coat. And the monster fled from the apartment and has been traveling on with it. Well, now that the monster can read, he discovers in the pocket of that, he discovers a journal. He discovers Victor's journal, which would include Victor's notes on how he put the monster together, how he created it, and how he felt about it. By the way, this journal also would probably have Victor's address in it. So if you're wondering, how is it that the monster was able to find Victor's home, this is how. You doubtless recollect these papers, he said. Here they are. Everything in them related to them bears reference to my accursed origin. The whole detail of that series of disgusting circumstances which produced in it set in view the minutest description of my odious and loathsome person is given. I sickened as I read. Hateful day when I received life. And then the monster gets to it here. The monster now in this cave looks at Victor and asks the question he's been begging to ask, the question that we all want him to ask. Accursed creator, why did you form a monster so hideous that even you turn from me in disgust? God in pity made man beautiful and alluring after his own image, but my form is a filthy type of yours, more horrid even than the very resemblance. Satan had his companions, fellow devils, to admire and encourage him, but I am solitary and abhorred. The monster asks his question. Why did you do this, Victor? Why, number one, why did you create me? But if you were going to create me, why did you make me the way you did? Why am I hideous and ugly? Even Satan, when he was cast into hell, had fellow demons with him, but I am alone. He finally asked the question that we've all been wanting him to ask throughout the story. All right, as this chapter goes on, the monster does describe here in chapter 15, he's like, at that point, going back to him reading Paradise Lost, reading these stories, he realizes that he's alone, that he's going to be alone unless he can find himself a family. And all he wants is to join DeLacy and his family. They're wonderful people. And so he does, in this next part of this chapter, the monster describes the steps he takes to put together a plan to introduce himself to DeLacy and his family. He's going to go meet him. He wants to meet him. He desires to be part of their family. And so the monster decides on this plan, that he's going to wait till one day when Felix, Agatha, and Safety are gone. And he wants to approach DeLacy. He wants to wait till DeLacy's alone, and he's going to approach them. This makes sense to him, of course, because DeLacy is blind. If there's anyone who's going to accept the monster, who's going to not turn him away, it will be DeLacy. DeLacy will not judge him based on his looks. And so the time comes in this chapter. The monster waits till they're away. He knocks at the door. DeLacy says, "Who's there?" He invites him in. And as you read this conversation, the monster goes into the hut, and the monster starts to meet with DeLacy. And DeLacy's like, "What's wrong, my dear traveler? You sound so despondent. What are you worried about? Come in." And for the first time in his life, the monster is greeted with warmth. DeLacy's like, "Let me get you some food. You want something to drink? I can get you some tea. Sit down by the fire and be warm. Talk to me." And for the first time, the monster feels warmth in the text. Someone is nice to him. DeLacy notices here that the monster speaks French. He's like, "Are you French?" And the monster goes, "No, but I was educated by a French family. Like, I've been, living in the back of your house for the last 4 years, learning the language. And I understand that language only. I'm here to claim the protection of some friends. I'm here to, try to, join this family." And DeLacy's like, "Oh, are they Germans?" "No, they're French." The monster's kind of skirting around the issue here. "But let us change the subject. I am deserted. I'm an outcast in this world." And DeLacy befriends the monster. DeLacy's like, "Do not despair. To be friendless is indeed unfortunate, but the hearts of men, when unprejudiced by self-interest, are full of brotherly love. You will be accepted." And the monster's plan is working here. DeLacy's welcoming him in. The monster's very excited about this. The monster describes, he talks about these people he's going to visit. He's like, "Oh, DeLacy, these people that I'm going to visit, they're great. They're the most excellent creatures in the world." And so the monster's like, "I'm going to try to unprejudice them. I'm going to try to win them over." And at this point, DeLacy starts getting a little suspicious. DeLacy's like, "Where do these friends reside? Like, where are you going here, my friend?" And the monster's like, "Near this spot, close to here." And the old man paused and continued, "If you will unreservedly confide to me the particulars of your tale, I might be of some use in undeceiving them. I am blind and cannot judge of your countenance, but there's something in your words which persuades me that you are sincere." It's working. The monster is finally going to have a family. Um, the monster's like, thank you. I will not, I obviously with your aid, I will not be driven from the society and sympathy of your fellow creatures. Um, you know, the mon- you know, for the first time, the monster is being accepted and being loved. And as this is happening, he hears sounds outside. He hears the approach of Felix, Agatha, and Safie are returning home, and the monster now has a moment of panic. This, I thought, was the moment of decision, he says, which was to rob me of or bestow happiness on me forever. I struggled vainly in firmness sufficient to answer him, but the effort destroyed all my remaining strength. I sank on the chair and sobbed aloud. At that moment, I heard the steps of my younger protectors. I had not a moment to lose, but seizing the hand of the old man, I cried, "Now is the time! Save and protect me. You and your family are the friends that I seek. Do not desert me in this hour of trial." The end of 15 here is one of the most iconic images of this book. The monster dropping to his knees, grabbing DeLacy's hand, crying out, "Protect me, save me, love me." "Great God," exclaimed the old man, "who are you?" And at that instant, the cottage door was opened, and Felix, Safie, and Agatha entered. Who can describe their horror and consternation on beholding me? Agatha fainted, and Safie, unable to attend her friend, rushed out of the cottage. Felix darted forward and with supernatural force tore me from his father, to whose knees I clung, and in a transport of fury he dashed me to the ground and struck me violently with a stick. I could have torn him limb from limb as the lion rends the antelope, but my heart sank within me with the bitter sickness, and I refrained. I saw him on the point of repeating his blow, when, overcome by pain and anguish, I quitted the cottage, and in the general tumult escaped unperceived to my hovel. It's one of the saddest moments in the book. Felix, Agatha, Safie come into the hut, they see the monster, and they're terrified of it. And the monster here is sobbing, he's crying, he wraps his arms around DeLacy's legs. "Protect me, save me." And yet Felix runs forward, grabs the monster, throws him to the ground, and starts to beat him with a stick. The monster has to run off, unsuccessful in his attempt to join the family. This is a key turning point in the book. The rejection of the monster once again. 4 years he has spent observing this family. He can't go back to his cave now. They know he's around. He has now been seen by this family. He can't go back to his cave. 4 years of his life has now just been torn up as he is rejected here by the family. That brings us to chapter 16, a powerful chapter here. Cursed, cursed career. Why did I live? He's like, why was I forced to live in this world where all men would always reject me? And so in chapter 16, the monster resolves after the rejection of DeLacy and his family. The monster is like, if there is anyone in this world who will accept me, who will embrace me, it's going to be my creator. At this point, there's nothing left for the monster but to find Victor. And remember, he had that journal, so he knows where Victor lives. He's like, at that point, I realized I need to go visit Victor. I need to find my creator and find out. And if there's anyone, who would, if there's anyone who will accept me, it will be Victor. And so, as the monster describes here, but this luxury of sensation that could not endure. I became fatigued with the excess of bodily exertion and sank on the damp grass in the sick impotence of despair. There was none of the myriads of men who existed who would pity and assist me. Should I feel kindness then towards my enemies? No. From that moment, I declared everlasting war against the species, and most of all, against him who had formed me and sent me into unsupportable misery. And so this is where the monster completely changes here. He goes on here. He never does see DeLacy and the family ever again. He never does see the family, as he describes here. I never saw any more of the family of DeLacy. And so the monster starts on his journey. He had learned from the papers where Victor lives. I'm going to scroll down here a little bit. And on his journey, a couple things happen on his journey to Geneva. Um, in this passage here, I continued to wind among the paths of the woods until I came to its boundary, which was skirted by a deep and rapid river. Here I paused, not exactly knowing what path to pursue, when I heard the sound of voices that induced me to conceal myself under the shade of a cypress. I was scarcely hid when a young girl came running into the spot where I was concealed, laughing, as if she ran from someone in sport. She continued her course along the precipitous sides of the river, when suddenly her foot slipped and she fell into the rapid stream. I rushed from my hiding place and with extreme labor from the force of the current saved her and dragged her to the shore. She was senseless, and I endeavored by every means in my power to restore animation, when I was suddenly interrupted by the approach of a rustic, who was probably the person from whom she had playfully fled. On seeing me, he darted towards me, and tearing the girl from my arms, hastened towards the deeper parts of the wood. I followed speedily, I hardly knew why, when the man saw me as I drew near, he aimed the gun which he carried at my body. I sank to the ground, and my injurer, with increasing swiftness, escaped in the wood. So, as the monster is making his way to Geneva, he comes across this young girl who's out playing. She slips and falls into the river. And the monster sees this little girl, and without thinking, wades out into the river, seizes upon her, pulls her back to shore, and saves her life, essentially. He lays her out on the shore there. He notices that she's unconscious. Now, the monster, for everything that he's learned, doesn't understand medicine. And so the monster grabs the little girl and shakes her, like, "Wake up, little girl." And as he does so, her father comes running out of the bushes and sees this huge monster standing over his girl, shaking her. And of course, what does he do but shoot the monster? Now the monster, and by the way, the gunshot's not enough to kill the monster, but now the monster walks around every day with a bullet in his side, causing him pain. And he's like, "Really? I was just trying to save this girl, and now I'm being punished for doing so with this incredible pain." This only adds to his anger. So he continues on his way. Um, let's see here. He continues on his way, and as he finally arrives in Geneva, he arrives at Plain Play. At this time, a slight sleep relieved me from the pain of my reflections, which was disturbed by the approach of a beautiful child who came running into the recess I had chosen. Here's another child who stumbles across the monster with the sportiveness of infancy. Suddenly, I gazed on him, and the idea seized me that this little creature was unprejudiced and had lived too short a time to have imbibed the horror of deformity. If therefore I could seize on him, educate him as my companion and friend, I should not be so desolate in this peopled earth. And so the monster sees this young boy running and playing, and he's like, maybe if I could this boy is too young to be prejudiced against me. If I could just seize upon him, I will make him my friend, and I will not be alone in this world. Urged by this impulse, I seized on the boy as he passed and drew him towards me. As soon as he beheld my form, he placed his hands before his eyes and uttered a shrill scream. I drew his hands forcibly from his face, and I said, "Child, what is the meaning of this? I do not intend to hurt you. Listen to me." He struggled violently. "Let me go, monster, ugly wretch. You wish to eat me and tear me to pieces. Let me go, or I will tell my papa." The boy rejects the monster again here. And the monster's like, "Boy, you'll never see your father. You must come with me." And then we get it. The young boy looks at the monster and says, "Hideous monster, let me go. My papa is a syndic. My papa is Mr. Frankenstein. He will punish you. You dare not keep me." This, ladies and gentlemen, is young William Frankenstein. The monster, as he comes to Geneva, comes across young William. He tries to befriend William. William rejects him. And when William says the name, when William says, "My father is Mr. Frankenstein," the monster realizes, you're part of that family of my creator who has done this to me. And then a key turning point in the novel here. The monster says, "Frankenstein, you belong then to my enemy, to him towards whom I have sworn eternal revenge." And then these 6 words: "You shall be my first victim." The child struggled and loaded me with epithets that carried despair to my heart. I grasped his throat to silence him, and in a moment he lay dead at my feet. Here's the moment where the monster goes evil, where the monster's like, fine, if everyone rejects me, then I will have my vengeance. And he does indeed kill young William. Strangles him right there in the park. As I gazed on my victim, he says, my heart swelled with exultation and hellish triumph. Clapping my hands, the monster says, I too can create desolation. My enemy is not invulnerable, and death will carry despair to him, and 1,000 other miseries shall torment and destroy him. And the monster embraces this. He's like, excellent. I've gotten vengeance on Victor. As I fixed my eyes on the child, I saw something glittering on his breast. I took it. It was a portrait of the most lovely woman. Here is the portrait, the locket that he stole, that Elizabeth had given William. In spite of my malignity, it softened and attracted me. Can you wonder at such thoughts transported me with rage? The monster here comes across this locket, and he takes it with him. While I was overcome with these feelings, I left the spot where I had committed the murder, and seeking a more secluded hiding place, I entered a barn which appeared to me to be empty. A woman was sleeping on some straw. Here is Justine Moritz. So as Justine, if you remember, the night that William goes missing, Justine got locked out of the town and was forced to stay in this barn. So as she is sleeping in the barn, if you remember in her testimony in chapter 8, Justine had described, I had heard, I was awoken by the sound of footsteps. And she never really goes back to those footsteps. It's obvious now those footsteps were the footsteps of the monster. He comes across Justine sleeping in the straw. She was young, not indeed so beautiful as the portrait I held, but of an agreeable aspect and blooming in the loveliness of youth and health. Here, I thought, is one of those joy-imparting smiles bestowed on all but me. And as I bent towards her, I whispered, awake, fairest, thy lover is near. He who would give his life to obtain one look of affection from thine eyes, my beloved, awake. This passage here, when the monster says, awake, fairest, thy lover is near, this is one of the changes in the 1831 edition. That line where the monster looks down upon Justine and he's like, hey, baby, your lover's here, is not in the original text. You have to understand the 1818 text was highly edited by Percy Shelley, who really wanted the monster to be kind of this mindless being. It's only when it's republished in 1831, when Mary Shelley republishes it, that she adds this line in because she wants to make the monster more human and a little bit more romantic here. And so the monster thinks for a moment of awaking Justine, like she'll be my lover. But the moment she starts to awake, he freaks out. He knew that if she awakes, that she would curse him, she would denounce him the murderer. He's like, I can't deal with this. The thought was madness, it stirred a fiend within me. Not I, but she shall suffer for the murder that I have committed, because I am ever robbed of that she could give me. She shall atone. So the monster's logic here is, Justine is like every other human. If she would just be nice to me and embrace me, I would be a nice monster. But she is like all the others. She will reject me, so she will pay the sin of my crime. And so the monster, after reading all those books and listening about justice and things like that, that he had learned from DeLacy and them, the monster learns how to frame someone, and he does. He slips the locket into her pocket, and of course, this is how Justine Moritz comes to have the locket in the pocket. So all of this, ladies and gentlemen, this chapter 16 here ends the monster's narration. All of this is going to lead up to chapter 17, and the monster, of course, asking Victor for what he wants. We know the monster is going to make a request of Victor, and we will see that as we move forward. I hope this is well, and I will talk to you next time.